It was supposed to be a quiet, perfect evening, the kind of night that might finally change everything. I had spent the whole afternoon in our small Portland kitchen, carefully preparing Dylan's favorite dinner: creamy truffle mushroom risotto, garlic roasted asparagus, and a freshly baked sourdough loaf I'd made from scratch the night before. I even lit candles, set the table with the good plates. Everything was intentional, precise, because tonight I was going to tell him. I was pregnant, 6 weeks along, our baby growing quietly inside me. He didn't know yet. No one did. Well, except for the woman who ruined it all. Joanne. Dylan's mother had moved in with us 9 months ago after her divorce. She said it was temporary, that she just needed a place to get back on her feet. But instead of healing, she had slowly poisoned the air inside our home. And tonight, she was the only variable I hadn't been able to control. She invited herself to dinner, brushing past my protest with a cool, "Family dinners are important, dear, especially when you've got secrets you think you're hiding so well." That should have been my first warning. I was already nauseous from the pregnancy, the kind of unrelenting sickness that doesn't wait until morning. But I pushed through, hoping tonight would be different. Hoping this meal, this night, this announcement might finally soften her, might make her see me. Instead, it broke me. I still remember the sound of her heels clicking against the hardwood as she walked toward Dylan. Just as I brought out the risotto, she placed a manicured hand on his shoulder and leaned in, whispering something too soft for me to hear. But I didn't need to hear it, because I saw his face. It changed in real time, from calm to furious, as if someone had flipped a switch inside him. His warm brown eyes went cold. His jaw clenched. He stood, so abruptly his chair screeched across the floor. "Is this true?" he demanded, staring straight at me. "You've been lying to me." I froze. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Maya. Did you think I wouldn't find out?" Before I could even process the words, his hand shot out. The slap came fast and sharp. I barely registered the sting before I was stumbling backward, hitting the wall behind me. My vision blurred. My cheek burned. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Then came the nausea, violent, involuntary. My stomach clenched, and in front of both of them, I threw up. Dylan recoiled, disgust etched across his face. "Maya, what the hell?" His words cut off when he saw something fall from my purse, which had tipped over in the chaos. A small pink stick. He reached down, picked it up, and looked at the tiny window. 2 lines. His face drained of color. "Is this?" I was still on the floor, clutching my stomach with one hand, the other covering my burning cheek. "Yes," I whispered. "I'm pregnant." Silence. For one long, suffocating moment. The only sound in the room was the sizzle of asparagus still crisping in the oven. Joanne said nothing. Her lips were pursed into a thin, satisfied line. But even she hadn't expected this. Dylan looked at the pregnancy test, then at me, then at his hand. "Oh my God," he murmured. "Maya, he stepped forward. I flinched. He stopped. The man who had once held my hair when I had food poisoning, who used to leave me notes in my lunchbox, who promised to love and protect me in front of our families, had just struck me while I was carrying his child. Everything I thought I knew about him shattered in that instant. Then came the sound that would change everything. The front door creaked open. Tessa, our neighbor, stood in the doorway, her eyes wide, breath catching when she saw my red cheek and the wreckage around us. "I heard shouting," she said slowly, eyes scanning Dylan, then Joanne. "Is everything okay in here?" I opened my mouth, but I couldn't say the word yet. No, nothing was okay, and I didn't know if it ever would be again. I met Dylan on a rainy Friday afternoon at Juniper and Brew, the cozy little cafe tucked between Powell's bookstore and the old movie theater on 11th. I was sitting near the window, grading a stack of children's books for the library's reading program, when a man juggling 2 iced coffees and a phone in his mouth stumbled past my table. and knocked over my entire pile of paperwork. "Oh, God, no, no! I'm so sorry," he said, voice muffled by the phone he tossed aside to grab napkins. "Please don't hate me. I swear I'm not usually this clumsy." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because he looked so genuinely horrified. His efforts to blot the papers were hopeless, but endearing. A complete stranger, apologizing over and over, red in the face, trying to save a worksheet about dinosaurs. "Let me make it up to you," he pleaded. "Coffee? Dinner? A new stack of children's books." I remember looking at him, tall, messy hair, kind eyes, and saying, "Start with dinner." That was the beginning. Dylan was golden. Kind, attentive, funny in a way that didn't need to be loud. He was an architect with a deep love for old houses and a habit of sketching people when he thought they weren't looking. He called me fascinating, treated my job at the public library like it was the most noble profession in the world. We got married a year later, in the fall, beneath a canopy of turning leaves. Our vows were quiet, honest, and filled with laughter. We bought a small house on the east side, old but full of charm, and talked about having children someday. On weekends, we wandered farmers markets, planned trips we couldn't afford, made slow breakfasts in our pajamas. It was simple. It was good. It was real. Until she moved in. "It's just temporary," Dylan said when Joanne called crying, 2 suitcases packed and nowhere to go after her second divorce. "She's heartbroken, Maya. She just needs a little time." I wanted to be understanding. I really did. But even from the beginning, Joanne made it clear I was not what she had imagined for her son. She never said it directly. That wasn't her style. Instead, it was small things. "Are you sure that's what you're wearing, dear? This risotto's a bit underseasoned, don't you think? Dylan works so hard. You should really give him more protein." She rearranged my spice rack while I was at work. Told me which laundry detergent Dylan used to prefer. Left passive-aggressive sticky notes about how to fold his t-shirts. At first, Dylan brushed it off. "That's just Mom," he said. "She doesn't mean anything by it." But slowly, her influence crept deeper. He started noticing things he'd never commented on before. The way I loaded the dishwasher, the time I spent on calls with my sister, my grocery choices, and those little criticisms. They always followed long, whispered conversations between him and Joanne, behind closed doors, over cups of tea late at night. Once, I overheard her on the phone. "She hides things, Dylan. I've seen her sneaking off to the bathroom. Probably stress. Or something else. Are you sure she's not keeping secrets?" My blood went cold. At the time, I brushed it off. I wanted to believe Dylan knew better, that he loved me enough to see through her need for control. But with every passing month, it got harder to tell where her voice ended and his began. Then, 3 weeks ago, I found out I was pregnant. And for a moment, everything else faded. I wanted to believe it would change things. That maybe this would be the moment he'd come back to me. That the man I married still lived somewhere inside him. But Joanne was always one step ahead. Looking back now, I realized Joanne never needed proof. She only needed doubt. And once that seed was planted in Dylan's mind, she watered it every day. I started noticing how quiet he became after speaking with her. How his eyes lingered a little longer when I said I was tired, how he'd glance sideways when I came back from the bathroom. The warmth in our conversations was gone, replaced by pauses, suspicions, and silence. Then came the night I caught Joanne eavesdropping. I had just returned home from work at the library, head pounding from nausea I couldn't explain away anymore. I went straight to the bathroom, as I had so many times lately, and closed the door. When I stepped out, there she was, Joanne, standing by the hallway, eyes narrowed like a hawk. "You've been running to the bathroom at odd hours," she said coolly. "Anything you want to share?" I forced a smile. "Just stress." She raised an eyebrow. "Funny. I had that same stress before I found out I was pregnant with Dylan." I walked past her without replying, but her meaning was crystal clear. From that day forward, her behavior shifted into something sharper, more pointed. She began checking the trash cans. Just organizing, she claimed. She hovered while I cooked, criticized how long I left food on the stove. "Smells like someone's hiding something," she'd mutter, loud enough for Dylan to hear. And he did. He'd enter the room with that same tight jaw, ask if I was feeling okay, ask again and again why I'd been distant if I had something to say. But how could I? I wanted to tell him about the baby. I had this dream in my head, me, him, our favorite meal, candles glowing, and a little onesie in a gift box. That's how I wanted him to find out. Just the two of us, before the world and before his mother got involved. But fear kept stopping me. Not just fear of his reaction, but fear that he wasn't really him anymore, that he had become her. That maybe if she told him the sky was green and I was lying, he'd believe it. So I waited. I kept saltine crackers in my library desk drawer, claiming I was just cutting back on sweets. I blamed my exhaustion on a book drive. I told myself I just needed a few more days, a perfect moment, one quiet night where we could be alone, where maybe I'd feel safe again. That moment never came. Instead, Joanne made sure of it. It was a Wednesday. Rain clung to the windows like it always did in early spring. I was in the kitchen layering the truffle risotto, heart pounding, stomach churning, nerves tangled in 1,000 knots. The onesie, white with tiny forest animals, was hidden in a gift box by the table. I kept glancing at it, imagining Dylan's face when he opened it. But then I heard her voice. She was in the living room, on the phone. I couldn't hear everything, but the words I caught were enough. "She's hiding something, I know it. Probably having an affair, running off every chance she gets. My son deserves better than that." My hands shook as I set the dish in the oven. An affair? Is that what she told him? Is that what she whispered in his ear? It all made sense, his growing coldness, the way he flinched when I touched him, the way his questions turned from curious to accusatory. She was poisoning him against me, not with facts, but with fear, with manipulation dressed as maternal concern. And worse, he believed her. I stared at the oven timer, watching the seconds tick down, feeling the weight of every second I had stayed silent, every second I had tried to keep the peace, every time I swallowed my instincts and played nice. And I knew, deep down, that whatever happened at dinner that night would change everything. I just didn't realize how fast everything would fall apart. The next few hours after that night were a blur, of tears, of pain, of disbelief. Tessa didn't ask questions. She just grabbed my coat, my bag, and gently guided me out the door, shielding me from Dylan's stunned expression and Joanne's sharp voice echoing behind us. "She's overreacting, Dylan. You know how women get when they're hormonal." But the door slammed shut behind me, and suddenly silence. It wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. My ears rang from the slap. My body trembled from adrenaline and morning sickness. And my heart was cracking in places I didn't know existed. Tessa lived just across the street. Her guest room had once been a cheerful space for her niece, with lavender sheets and string lights around the window. That night, I collapsed onto the bed and curled into myself, clutching my stomach, terrified I might have harmed the tiny life inside me. "I called your doctor," Tessa said gently. "They'll see you first thing tomorrow." I nodded, unable to speak. The next morning, she drove me, held my hand in the waiting room, rubbed my back when I broke down trying to explain what happened. I'll never forget the moment the ultrasound monitor lit up. A small flutter, then the sound, strong, steady, beautiful, the heartbeat of a life not yet born, but already loved. Tears slid silently down my cheeks, not from fear or sadness, from something deeper. The sound wrapped around my broken heart and held it together, just enough. "Do you want me to record it?" the nurse asked gently. I nodded. That night, wrapped in one of Tessa's oversized sweatshirts, sitting on the edge of the guest bed, I stared at my phone for a long time. I had promised myself I wouldn't contact him. Not after what he did. Not after how quickly he believed her. But the sound of that heartbeat, it wasn't mine to carry alone. I opened the audio file, pressed play once, closed my eyes, then attached it in a message. Your child's heartbeat. That was all I wrote. No anger, no guilt, no explanations, just the truth. His reply came within minutes. Please, can we talk? Just us. No, Mom. Please, Maya. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering. My cheek was still tender, the bruise blooming yellow beneath the surface. But I wasn't doing this for him. I was doing it for the baby. I needed answers. I needed clarity. I needed to look into his eyes and see who was still in there if anyone was left. I typed back, tomorrow, 2 p.m., Juniper and Brew. You show up with her, I walk away forever. I won't, he replied. I swear. I'm choosing you this time. The next morning, I stood in front of the cafe where we first met, shivering not from the cold, but from everything that still ached inside me. Tessa was parked across the street, engine running, eyes locked on me from behind the wheel. My lifeline, just in case. At 2 p.m., sharp, the cafe bell chimed. Dylan walked in, alone. No coat, just a faded blue shirt and eyes sunken with sleepless nights. He paused when he saw me, like he wasn't sure I'd really come. Neither was I. But I had. For me. For the child inside me. For the version of myself that refused to be broken. Can I sit? He asked quietly. I nodded, even as my whole body screamed to run. He sat, but this time not close. He kept distance, kept his hands on the table. His voice, when he finally spoke, was hoarse. I kicked her out last night, he said. Joanne. She's staying at a hotel. I packed her bags myself. I said nothing, because actions are louder than words, and I needed to see more. I didn't touch my tea. It sat between us like a boundary, steam rising between two people who once shared everything and now shared nothing but silence. Dylan looked thinner, tired. The stubble on his jaw was new, and his shirt was wrinkled. Same one he'd worn the night it happened. His hands were clenched together on the table, knuckles white. I'm so sorry, he said quietly. For everything. For believing her. For not asking you. For what I did. I stayed quiet. After you left, he continued, I found her on the phone with one of her friends, laughing, saying she'd finally saved me from your lies. She said it loud enough that I knew. She made it all up. She twisted everything. My fingers trembled under the table, but I forced my voice to stay steady. And you hit me because of her. Dylan's eyes filled with tears. I know. And there's no excuse. I believed her because somewhere deep down I let myself. I let her control me for so long, I didn't even see it. I stared at him. The man who once made me laugh, so hard I cried. The man who promised to protect me. The man who had used his hand, not to hold me, but to hurt me. I need you to understand something, I said slowly. You didn't just hit me. You hit us. His eyes dropped to my stomach. I know, he whispered. I do. And I hate myself for it. Then prove it. He looked up, startled. I continued. I have conditions. If you break even one, I'm done. I don't care how sorry you are. I won't raise our child in fear. He nodded once. Okay. 1. Your mother never sets foot in our house again. Not for holidays. Not for visits. Not at the hospital. Nothing. She gets no information about the baby. No photos. No updates. Done. 2. You go to therapy. Alone. Every week. And we do couples counseling too. You start immediately. I already had my first session yesterday. 3. I said, leaning in, my voice like ice. If you ever raise a hand to me again, even once, I will press charges and file for full custody. No second chances. His shoulders dropped, shame folding his body. I wouldn't blame you, he said, then reached into his pocket and slid something across the table. A business card, family law attorney. I already asked her to draft custody papers, he said. If I ever get violent again, you get full custody. No fight, no court. It's in writing. My throat closed up. He was serious. For the first time in weeks, I saw something real in his eyes. Not just guilt, but the will to change. The man I married, buried under layers of control and denial, clawing his way out. Still, I didn't relax. Because words are easy. Change isn't. I'm not coming home, I said quietly. Not yet. He nodded. I understand. And we don't do anything until counseling begins. Already booked, he replied, sliding another card toward me. Dr. Reena Patel, trauma-informed, couples counseling. I don't want promises, Dylan, I said. I want proof. Over time. You don't get to earn me back in a day. His voice cracked. Whatever you need. I took a breath. A long, hard breath. Then here's what I need next, I said. The next doctor's appointment. You can come. His face lit up like I'd handed him the sun. But Tessa comes too, I added. I'm not ready to be alone with you, yet. Of course, he nodded quickly. Anything that makes you feel safe. For the first time since that night, I allowed myself a flicker of something fragile. Not forgiveness, but maybe the beginning of something else. Something stronger. Respect. Boundaries. Accountability. As we stood up to leave, Dylan glanced at me one last time. I should have chosen you from the beginning. No, I said softly. You should have chosen yourself, and unlearned everything she ever taught you. Then I walked out first. And this time he didn't try to follow. It started with a text. Dylan, your mother's outside my library. I was sitting at my desk in the youth wing, organizing new arrivals for the spring reading program, when I saw the silver Lexus SUV parked across the street. Engine running, Joanne in the driver's seat, sunglasses on, unmoving. Watching. My third graders were out back for an author visit, so it was just me inside. My hands trembled as I typed the message. She's been there 20 minutes, just watching the front door. His reply came fast. Don't move. I'm calling the police. 15 minutes later, 2 officers arrived. From behind the library blinds, I watched as they approached her car. Joanne immediately turned on the tears. Trembling hands, cracking voice, the perfect victim. I'm just worried about my son, she said, loud enough that I could hear her through the glass. His wife is unstable. She's keeping me from my grandchild. Then her tone shifted, sharp as a knife. She trapped him with that baby. She's poisoning him against me. Ashley, the library assistant, stood beside me, eyes wide. Want me to film this? She whispered. You mentioned you might need evidence for that restraining order. I nodded. My fingers clenched the windowsill. But my heart had already begun to shift. Not with fear, but with clarity. This was who Dylan had grown up with. That night, during our couples session with Dr. Patel, I showed Dylan the footage. He didn't speak for a long time, just stared at the screen, hands pressed to his forehead, eyes glassy. I never saw it before, he whispered. She's exactly like when Dad left. She'd scream, cry, make herself the victim, and I always believed her version. Dr. Patel's voice was calm, steady. Generational patterns of emotional abuse are hard to break, Dylan. But every time you choose Maya over her manipulation, you're breaking the cycle. He turned to me. I want that cycle broken before our daughter is born. And just like that, it became real. Our daughter. The next week, I had another ultrasound. Tessa drove me to the clinic, and Dylan followed behind in his car. A precaution we'd agreed on. Boundaries still mattered. Safety still mattered. Inside, the technician smiled as she slid the gel across my stomach. Would you like to know the gender? She asked. I looked at Dylan. For the first time in months, I saw hope in his face instead of guilt. I nodded. It's a girl. My breath caught. A girl. A tiny future already growing inside me. I reached instinctively for my belly, and for the first time, Dylan reached across the space between us, and I let him. His fingers brushed mine. Gentle. Careful. She'll never know this kind of fear, he whispered. Not while I'm breathing. But Joanne wasn't done. As Tessa and I walked back to the car, we saw her leaning against her SUV in the parking lot. Her lipstick perfect, her eyes cold. Before I could react, Dylan stepped between us. He hadn't even hesitated. Leave, he said. Now. I have a right to know about my granddaughter, she snapped. You can't cut me out. You lost that right the day you made me hurt her mother. Joanne's face twisted. She's turning you against me, just like your father. She's tearing this family apart. Security is on their way, Tessa interrupted calmly, holding up her phone. The clinic's already been notified. Joanne's eyes darted from me to Dylan, to Tessa and back again, but something in her flickered. She realized, maybe for the first time, that she had lost. She backed away slowly, heels clicking, voice tight with rage. This isn't over. But we knew it was, because this time we were the ones drawing the line. That night, back in Tessa's guest room, I sat by the door. Dylan wasn't allowed to stay yet, we still weren't ready, but he sat outside, just on the other side of the wall. I filed for the restraining order, he said softly through the door. For all three of us. My hand moved to my belly. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since everything fell apart, I felt something I hadn't dared to feel in weeks. Not just hope, but safety. I returned home in the 5th month of my pregnancy. Tessa helped me pack, folded my maternity clothes with quiet care, like each shirt was a choice I had made for myself. Are you sure about this? She asked as we zipped up the last suitcase. No, I admitted, but I need to try. Not for him, for her. The drive back felt longer than it should have. My hands trembled slightly on my lap as we pulled up to the house. The same house where I had been slapped, humiliated, gaslit. But when I stepped inside, everything had changed. Joanne's things were gone. No more crystal figurines glaring from the mantel. No more homemade potpourri that made my eyes sting. No more photos of Dylan as a child with a handwritten note that said, "My little man, always mine." Even the walls had changed. Dylan had painted them soft yellows and greens, the same shades we'd picked for the nursery years ago, back when having children still felt like a shared dream. I got rid of the dining room table, he said quietly, appearing in the hallway like a shadow, learning how to stand in the light. Didn't want you to have to look at it every day. In its place stood a round oak table, warm, welcoming, no head of the table, no hierarchy, no throne for his mother to hold court from. Everything felt softer, but I didn't unpack everything. Not yet. We created new routines. Dylan would text before coming home, even if it was just from work. We cooked together, small things. He never assumed, never acted like he was entitled to closeness. He knew now everything was earned. Every decision about our baby was made together. No whispers, no interference. And then came the first test. At 7 months, a package arrived at my workplace, beautifully wrapped with a silver ribbon. Inside was an antique rattle, heavy, cold, engraved with EMW, Elena Maya Walker, our baby's initials. There was no note inside, just a small card slipped underneath the tissue paper. Blood is thicker than restraining orders. I stood there in the staff room, holding that message like it was a loaded weapon. I didn't cry. I took a photo, sent it to Dylan, and 20 minutes later, he showed up at the library, the rattle in hand, marching straight to our lawyer's office. She's testing boundaries, he told the attorney. I want that documented. That night, he found me in the nursery, sitting in the rocking chair we'd assembled the weekend before, hands pressed to my belly. I'm scared, I whispered. What if she never stops? Then we never stop either, he said. Every time she pushes, we push back, with truth, with the law, with each other. I won't let her near our daughter. We met with Dr. Patel the next morning to build a full safety plan. We created new passwords for daycare pickup, installed security cameras, informed neighbors and friends. Even Tessa's partner Tom, a local police officer, agreed to be our emergency contact. Every step made me breathe a little easier. Then we got a call from the hospital. Someone had been calling, pretending to be my mother, asking about my birth plan. "Joanne, I'll change the registration," Dylan said instantly. "Different hospital. I'll register you under Tessa's address. No one else will know." I nodded, throat tight with anxiety. But I couldn't ignore what I saw in him now. How fast he moved, how thoroughly he protected. How different he was from the man who once stood silent while I cried in our kitchen. "You're doing the work, Dr. Patel said in our next session. "Both of you. That's what matters." And it did, because the nursery we built together wasn't just a room. It was a symbol of reclaimed space, of healing, of the kind of love we wanted our daughter to know. Not the love that controlled, but the love that protected. Labor began at 2:13 a.m. on a Tuesday. It wasn't dramatic, just a slow tightening across my lower back that grew more frequent with each hour. By 4 o'clock, I woke Dylan. By 4:05, he was already in motion. He followed the plan exactly. Tessa was called, the hospital bag already in the trunk, the car seat secured, the cameras on, front door locked, back door double-checked. No signs of the silver Lexus. We drove to the new hospital registered under Tessa's address. Private maternity wing. Security briefed. Our OB already waiting. The delivery room was nothing like what I had feared. No screaming. No chaos. Just steady breathing. A hand holding mine. Dylan at my side. Tessa just outside the door like a sentinel. 12 hours later, after what felt like a lifetime of contractions and clenched jaws and whispered encouragement, our daughter arrived. Elena Maya Walker. Tiny, pink, lungs screaming with life. A perfect cry. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and eyes that opened wide before the nurse could even wrap her in the soft, green blanket. Dylan sobbed. He didn't even try to hide it. "She's perfect," he whispered, touching her foot gently. "She looks just like you." I held her against my chest, heart wide open, arms trembling not from exhaustion, but from love that cracked through every scar, every bruise, every broken moment before this. This was ours. This was what we fought for, until someone tried to take it again. An hour later, a nurse walked in holding a bouquet. White lilies, a simple card, to my first granddaughter. She'll need her grandmother soon enough. Blood is forever. Jay, I stared the message. It wasn't anger I felt. It was finality. "Give this to security," I said calmly. "Have them flag the name. Anyone who delivers on her behalf, we want documented." The nurse nodded and left. Dylan didn't say a word, just stood, holding Elena's tiny hand, eyes hard with resolve. That night, Tom, Tessa's partner and our emergency contact, took the night shift outside our hospital room. He stood near the door like a quiet shadow, sipping coffee and scrolling his phone, ready to intervene at the first sign of trouble. But there was none, because Joanne knew. She had no power here anymore. 3 days later, we came home, not just to a house, but to a new life. The locks were changed, security reinforced, the nursery lit with soft morning sun, and a wall of hand-painted woodland animals Dylan had stayed up late to finish. "Welcome home, Elena," I whispered as I carried her in. The first nights were hard. Diaper changes, late feedings, exhaustion that blurred the days. But in between the chaos, there were quiet moments of peace. Moments where Dylan would rock her to sleep humming lullabies. Moments where we laughed when she sneezed mid-yawn. Moments where I looked around the nursery and realized I wasn't afraid anymore. At Elena's 1-month checkup, the pediatrician smiled. "She's thriving," she said. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." And we did, together. One quiet afternoon, as I sat in the nursery folding laundry, Dylan returned from the grocery store, silent. He stood in the doorway for a long time, Elena asleep in her bassinet beside me. "I saw her," he said finally, "at the store." My heart skipped. What happened? She tried to speak to me. I walked away, called the store manager, followed our plan. I exhaled. "And how do you feel?" I asked. "Sad," he admitted, "but steady." I didn't hesitate, Maya. Not once. She doesn't own any part of me anymore. He walked over, took my hand. "Our daughter will never have to unlearn the kind of love I grew up with," he said. "She'll only know the real kind, the kind that builds, that protects, that chooses over and over again." I looked at our child, sleeping, safe, surrounded by a future we carved out of wreckage. "You broke the cycle," I whispered. "No," he said. "We did." Outside, the sun was setting, painting the nursery walls in gold. We didn't just survive. We rebuilt. For her. And that made every scar worth it. 3 days before Christmas, while the city outside shimmered with lights and quiet carols filtered through the frozen air, my world shifted in a single phone call. I had just walked through the door of my tiny apartment in Asheville, kicking off my hospital clogs and shrugging out of my heavy winter coat, a tired but genuine smile tugging at my lips. In the corner of the room sat my carefully packed suitcase, a small forest green sweater draped neatly over it, and several wrapped presents stacked, like promises by the door. I had bought gifts for everyone, even remembered the ingredients for the apple cinnamon bread, pudding my family loved, but never seemed to remember who made. I had tried so hard to do everything right to be enough. When my phone buzzed and I saw Ethan's name flash on the screen, I thought nothing of it. Maybe he needed me to bring extra napkins or maybe coordinate rides, like every other year. I picked up, the warmth still in my voice. "Hey, Ethan." But his voice was different this time, lighter, almost rehearsed. "Hey, Nat. So listen, Celeste is coming to Christmas this year. She's really sensitive to, energies and stuff. With your work, the hospital, and everything can feel kind of heavy. I think, for her sake, it might be better if you sat this one out. It's nothing personal." I stood there, staring at the lights blinking lazily on my small Christmas tree. Nothing personal. My hands tightened around the phone, but I kept my voice even. "Okay," I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. An hour later, my mother called. Her voice was soft, the way it always got when she wanted something unpleasant to sound gentle, like wrapping barbed wire in silk. "Honey, we're just trying to make things easy for everyone. You know how Celeste is. If you come, it might cause confusion. Honestly, if you show up, we might not even answer the door." That was it. No pretense left. No invitation withheld with regret. No, this was an eviction wrapped in pleasantries. I wasn't just not wanted. I was unwelcome. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't plead for a spot at the table where I had never truly belonged. I simply hung up, set the phone down carefully on the counter, and stared at the small, hopeful pile of wrapped gifts by the door, gifts that would never be opened by the people I had spent my life trying to love enough to be seen. I moved slowly, deliberately, like someone packing up after an invisible funeral. I logged into my banking app. Mortgage top-up canceled. Emergency maintenance fund locked. Car loan assistance terminated. I wasn't angry. I was simply done. For years, I had convinced myself that love meant sacrifice, that being the dependable one was enough to earn a seat at the family table. But standing there in the quiet, with the hum of the radiator and the smell of cinnamon lingering from the bread, pudding I had baked that morning, I realized the truth. I was never really invited to belong. I was just tolerated until my presence became inconvenient. The first snow began to fall outside, soft and relentless, blanketing the street in silence. I watched it through the window, feeling an unexpected stillness settle inside me. No more trying. No more shrinking myself down to fit into the cramped spaces they offered. No more pretending. This Christmas, I would not be the one standing outside the door, heart in hand, begging to be let in, and for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't have to be. Growing up, I used to think it was normal, the way some children shone brighter under the same roof while others simply kept the lights on. I was born first, the trial run, as my father once joked at a barbecue while handing Ethan the bigger slice of cake. The golden boy, the miracle baby, creative, charming, the one they had prayed for during endless nights of silent disappointment. And me? I was just first. I remember the day Ethan took a black permanent marker to the living room walls, his wild loops and swirls covering the beige paint like rebellious vines. My parents called it expressive, their laughter warm and indulgent. When I dropped a bowl while setting the table 2 days later, I was careless, too distracted, too serious. I remember their faces then, the way they looked at me like I was an obligation wrapped in skin, an expectation I could never quite meet. At school, I earned straight A's without missing a beat. The report cards were slid into drawers without a word, while Ethan's participation ribbon hung proudly on the fridge for weeks. Once, I wrote a letter to my guidance counselor asking for help applying to medical school. I left it on the kitchen counter, perfectly placed, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to ask why I needed it. No one ever did. When I got my acceptance into the University of North Carolina School of Medicine, first round, no wait list, I came home holding the letter like a trophy. My mother skimmed it, smiled faintly, and said, "That's intense, honey. You'll have to be careful not to burn out." Then she turned back to the stove, stirring something that would never quite taste like approval. And Ethan, when he dropped out of college for the third time, chasing the dream of creative direction, they threw him a re-entry party. Balloons, cake, a framed photo of him holding a paintbrush still hangs in the hallway like a shrine. The house, which had never celebrated my milestones, practically vibrated with pride for the son who hadn't yet found his footing. I once found one of my old sketchbooks, doodles from long shifts, fragments of stories and sunsets, tossed into the recycling bin under a pile of grocery store flyers. When I asked about it, they laughed and said they thought it was scrap paper. Maybe it was to them, maybe I was too. Still, I kept going. Through med school, through residency, through long nights of sitting beside patients no one else wanted to sit with. I chose geriatrics because I saw something in those abandoned hallways, a mirror, maybe a silent kinship with people who had given their lives to others and been forgotten when they stopped being convenient. At home, my role remained unchanged. Quiet, reliable, invisible. I paid for the leaky roof when the insurance wouldn't cover it. I slipped extra cash into Ethan's accounts when his freelance gigs dried up. I covered copays for my mother's physical therapy. I sent money when Dad's truck needed new brakes. I did it because I loved them, or maybe because I still believed love was something you earned, something you bought with enough sacrifice. They never asked for public thanks. They didn't need to. Gratitude, in their language, wasn't spoken aloud. It was assumed like air, like obligation. And so, every time I handed over another piece of myself, they took it with open hands and closed hearts, never once thinking to look back. I told myself that was what family meant. Unseen but necessary. The scaffolding holding up everyone else's dreams. It wasn't until the phone calls that night, their voices so casual, so polite in their cruelty, that I realized scaffolding isn't supposed to bleed for the building it supports. Adulthood didn't change the pattern, it just made it more expensive. I moved into my first apartment after residency, a one-bedroom with peeling paint and a faulty heater, while Ethan lived downtown in a loft that my parents helped subsidize because he needed inspiration. When their roof caved in after a spring storm, I was the one who quietly wired the money to the contractor. When their medical bills piled up after Dad's surgery, I negotiated payment plans and sent checks they never even acknowledged. No one asked me to. No one had to. It was easier that way, being useful without being seen. I told myself that my purpose was to catch the pieces that would otherwise shatter, that my value wasn't in being celebrated, but in being essential. Every emergency had my name written in invisible ink across it. Ethan's dead car battery at midnight. I paid for a new one before the morning frost thawed. My mother's overdue physical therapy. I called the clinic myself, settled the bills, and arranged transportation. When Ethan impulsively bought new camera equipment and couldn't afford his Thanksgiving flight home, I covered the ticket again. He hugged me at the airport, called me the best sister ever, and by the next week the favor was forgotten, folded into the endless ledger of expectations. They never had to ask. I stayed ahead of their needs like a ghost in the machinery of their lives, fixing, smoothing, covering, while carefully erasing my own fingerprints. Gratitude would have made it harder to keep using me. So it was better, maybe, that they forgot. I was the scaffolding again, the hidden beam in the house they never thought to thank because it had never collapsed until now. Sometimes late at night, after double shifts at the hospital, I would sit by the window with a cup of tea and wonder what it would feel like to be seen. Not as a utility, not as a fallback plan, but simply as Natalie, someone whose presence was enough without having to earn her keep every holiday, every family dinner, every whispered crisis. But the years taught me not to linger too long on wishes. Wishes were for children and golden boys. Wishes didn't pay mortgages or reset expectations carved in bone. So I kept moving, kept showing up, kept absorbing every slight and every omission like a sponge that was never supposed to leak. When Christmas rolled around each year, I baked the apple cinnamon bread pudding they all loved, carefully wrapping it in foil and smiling when they said, "Oh, this is just like the one from last year," as if it had appeared by magic. When Ethan struggled with rent between gigs, I wired a quiet deposit into his account and ignored the way he only called afterward to brag about a new project. When my parents needed help filing their taxes, I stayed up until 2 in the morning on the phone, walking them through deductions they barely understood, while my own returns sat untouched on the counter. I thought that love meant being the one who stayed late, who answered every call, who solved every problem before it could become an inconvenience. I thought that if I just did enough, sacrificed enough, eventually the equation would balance. Eventually someone would look at me and see more than a safety net stretched too thin. But that night, standing in my small kitchen with the phone still warm in my hand, I realized the terrible truth. No matter how much I gave, they would never see me, because they had never learned how, and I had never made them. That night, after the phone calls ended and the false pleasantries dissolved into silence, I sat alone in my dimly lit apartment, the scent of cinnamon still clinging to the air like a memory that refused to leave. Outside, the snow thickened, soft and indifferent, blanketing the city in a quiet that felt almost reverent. I watched it fall through the frosted window, the lights from the street lamps blurring into halos. I reached for my phone again, but not to call them, not to beg or to reason or to fight. I opened my banking app, the familiar blue and white screen, flickering to life with a quiet beep. Mortgage top-up canceled. $800 a month that had quietly kept their house from slipping into default gone. Emergency maintenance fund locked. No more rainy day rescues. Car loan assistance terminated. Ethan's new battery would be his own problem next winter. It felt mechanical at first, clicking buttons, toggling off automatic payments that had long been woven into my routine, like brushing my teeth or paying my own rent. But with each cancellation, each deliberate act of removal, a strange lightness unfurled inside me, like a bird stretching its wings for the first time in a cage left accidentally open. I pulled out a notebook and made a list, the quiet debts I had absorbed without protest over the years, the plane tickets, the medical bills, the late-night wire transfers, the whispered emergencies, solved without ceremony. I stared at the list until the ink blurred, not from tears, but from a grief so old and so deep it had hardened into something almost clean. I wasn't angry, not in the way they would later accuse me of being. I was simply awake for the first time. They would not notice right away. That's the thing about being the invisible scaffolding. It's only when you're gone that anyone realizes you were holding up the whole damn ceiling. The missed mortgage payment wouldn't sting until the final notice arrived. The forgotten rainy day fund wouldn't matter until the pipes burst again in January. Ethan's gigs would still flutter and fall like they always did. But this time there would be no soft landing stitched together by my hands. I didn't announce it. No grand declarations. No fiery text messages. No social media posts dripping with vague sadness. I didn't even tell Aunt Lillian, the only member of the family who still sent me birthday cards with handwritten notes. I simply withdrew, quietly, completely. I deleted the half-written holiday message I had drafted earlier that day, the one wishing everyone a warm and joyful Christmas. I unplugged the tree. I put the wrapped gifts back into the closet, their cheerful paper suddenly garish and strange against the starkness of my new resolve. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel the need to. There was no room for sorrow in the space that had opened inside me, only clarity. Love, I realized, shouldn't feel like a constant performance for an audience that never bothers to applaud. Family shouldn't be a ledger where the cost of belonging is measured in sacrifice after sacrifice until there's nothing left to give. I had spent years believing that if I just gave enough, stayed small enough, smiled wide enough, I could earn a place that should have been mine without question. But love that demands your silence isn't love at all. And family that only welcomes your usefulness isn't family, it's a transaction. One I was no longer willing to pay into. The snow outside thickened, covering the world in a fresh, indifferent hush. Somewhere across town, my family laughed and planned a Christmas I was not invited to. A Christmas they believed would be lighter without me. I let them have it. I let them build their celebration on the illusion they had so carefully constructed, the one where I was the problem, the heavy one, the inconvenient reminder that not everything pretty is pure. For the first time in my life, I chose not to show up, and in doing so, I reclaimed something I hadn't even realized I had lost. Myself. Christmas morning came soft and gray, the world outside blanketed in a heavy silence that seemed to seep into my bones. I sat by the window with a mug of tea cradled in my hands, the faint scent of apple and cinnamon rising from the steam, bittersweet and strangely hollow. The gifts I had so carefully wrapped sat untouched in the corner, bright paper and careful bows mocking me with their misplaced hope. I didn't light the tree. I didn't turn on the holiday playlist that usually played low in the background. I didn't call anyone. I simply sat there, wrapped in a blanket that still smelled faintly of rosemary and fabric softener, staring out at a world that for once reflected exactly how I felt inside, quiet, cold, and achingly still. And yet there was no grief clawing at me, no sobs waiting just beneath the surface. There was only a strange, almost sacred stillness, the kind that follows a storm so complete it leaves the air scrubbed clean. I hadn't realized how much noise I had been carrying until it was gone. The day slipped by in slow motion. Noon came and went without the usual flurry of calls and chaotic background noise from my parents' living room. No group photos. No Ethan posting festive selfies with Celeste, the new darling of the family narrative. No last-minute texts asking me to Venmo money because the ham was more expensive than they thought. Just silence. It wasn't until the sun dipped low behind the hills, staining the sky a deep violet, that my phone buzzed. Once, then twice, then 3 times in rapid succession. I ignored it at first, assuming it was some group thread I had forgotten to mute. But then a message popped up. Aunt Lillian, can you answer? You've done enough damage already. My stomach dropped, the words burning into my retinas like an accusation carved in flame. Damage? What damage? I hadn't even been there. Before I could fully process it, my phone rang again. Aunt Lillian's name flashed across the screen. I answered, my voice hoarse from disuse. What happened? I asked. Her voice was soft, careful, like someone approaching a wounded animal. They're saying you ruined Christmas, she said. But you weren't even there. I blinked, stunned into silence. How could I have ruined something I hadn't even been invited to? How could absence be more disruptive than presence? Aunt Lillian hesitated, then continued, piecing the story together in slow, broken phrases. Apparently, some time after dinner, Celeste had wandered through the house, glass of wine in hand, admiring old family photos lined up on the mantel. She had paused at one, a faded snapshot of me from a birthday party long ago, smiling awkwardly in a too-big sweater, and she had recognized me. "That's Dr. Natalie Hartman," she had said aloud, her voice carrying over the low hum of post-dinner chatter. "She saved my grandmother's life." According to Aunt Lillian, the room fell silent in an instant, forks frozen halfway to mouths, laughter dying mid-breath. What happened next was a blur, mumbled half-truths, awkward glances, a tension thick enough to choke on. Celeste asked if I was the sister they always talked about, and whatever she heard in response made her quietly gather her things, thank my parents stiffly, and leave without another word. By the time Aunt Lillian called me, the fallout had already begun. Celeste had posted something online, something honest, something raw, and it had started to ripple through the delicate web of connections my family had spent years weaving around Ethan's budding art career. I didn't know all the details yet. I didn't need to. I could picture it perfectly. The whispered jokes about me being too intense, the casual cruelty disguised as concern, the way they reduced my entire existence to a cautionary tale about ambition and loneliness. It wasn't new, but for once, someone else had been paying attention. Someone who hadn't been raised to believe that kind of cruelty was just the way families loved. Someone who had seen me, really seen me, not through the distorted lens of resentment and guilt, but through the clear memory of a moment when kindness had mattered more than image. That night, as I sat in the deepening quiet, I realized something, maybe the most powerful thing I had ever learned. Sometimes the most profound revenge isn't slamming doors or shouting truths no one wants to hear. Sometimes it's simply stepping away and letting the truth echo in the silence you leave behind. The day after Christmas, the desperation started leaking through the cracks. It began with an email subject line, "Let's reset things," as if years of erasure and dismissal could be wiped clean with a clever title. It was signed not just by my mother or father individually, but by both of them, and Ethan too, as if presenting a united front would somehow erase the fracture they had spent decades carving. I opened it with the clinical detachment I reserved for the worst patient notes, the ones you knew were a disaster before you even read them. They didn't apologize, not really. There were words about heightened emotions, about misunderstandings, about how much they valued family in that careful, polished language that says everything and means nothing. Buried halfway down the fourth paragraph was the real reason for the sudden olive branch. They wanted me to reach out to Celeste, to clarify things, to smooth it over, to protect Ethan's reputation in the art circles she was connected to in New York. It wasn't about me. It was never about me. It was about the fallout, the mess I hadn't even made, the mirrors cracking under the weight of their own reflection. They hadn't suddenly realized they had mistreated me. They had simply realized the cost of that mistreatment had risen higher than they were willing to pay. I didn't reply. That night, my phone buzzed again. This time a call from the hospital administrator, someone I had met only once at a charity gala, a man with kind eyes and a firm handshake. He apologized awkwardly, said my father had contacted him, expressed concerns about my emotional stability, implied that perhaps I was struggling and maybe needed some time off. I felt my face flush with cold rage, the kind that doesn't explode but crystallizes, sharp and cutting. My father, the man who once joked that I was too serious for my own good, was now weaponizing that seriousness against me, not because he believed it, but because he thought it would scare me into compliance. Thankfully, the administrator saw through it, but the damage was clear. They weren't trying to mend anything. They were trying to discredit me, to control me the only way they knew how, by making me small again. When that failed, the next wave came in the form of group texts to extended family, carefully curated half-truths painting me as volatile, isolated, struggling with some things right now. No mention of being uninvited from Christmas. No mention of the years of silent sacrifice. Just a quiet campaign of whispers, designed to erode trust before I could even open my mouth. A cousin I hadn't heard from in 5 years messaged me offering a voucher for a yoga retreat, just in case you're feeling overwhelmed. She wrote with a smiling emoji at the end. Overwhelmed wasn't the word, awake was. Each attempt at manipulation, each small betrayal dressed in the language of concern, only clarified what I had already begun to understand. They weren't fighting for me. They were fighting for the image of themselves they had built in their own minds, the family where Ethan was brilliant and beloved, where I was the dutiful, quiet sister who never made waves, where appearances were preserved at all costs. But I was done preserving them. I watched the snow continue to fall outside my window, each flake erasing another trace of the road behind me. And for the first time I felt no urge to explain, no desperate need to defend my side of the story. I knew the truth, and maybe, just maybe, that was finally enough. It didn't end with whispers and emails. It never does with people who believe they are owed your silence. The next move came quietly, insidiously, wrapped in the familiar softness of my mother's voice at my door. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind of winter day where the cold seems to press against the windows like a living thing. I was filing patient notes at my desk, a mug of lukewarm tea forgotten beside me, when I heard it, a soft, almost tentative knock. I didn't move at first. I just listened to the sound of my own heartbeat, steady and calm. Then I rose, walked slowly to the door, and peeked through the peephole. There they were, my mother, my father, and Ethan, standing awkwardly on the front step, bundled in coats and forced smiles. A family portrait painted in desperation. I didn't open the door right away. I didn't feel fear, only a detached sort of sadness, the kind you feel when you finally realize the rescue ship you've been waiting for is just another mirage. I opened the door a fraction, enough to let the cold seep in, but not enough to invite them inside. My mother spoke first, her voice carefully calibrated to sound gentle. "We just want to talk," she said, clutching her purse like a lifeline. I didn't move. I didn't nod. I didn't soften, because I finally understood they weren't here for me. They were here for the version of me who still thought love could be bartered, for the girl who used to fold herself smaller and smaller to fit into the narrow spaces they allowed. That girl didn't live here anymore. The silence stretched between us, thick and brittle. I saw the flicker of frustration in my father's eyes, the way Ethan shifted his weight from foot to foot, like he wanted to be anywhere else. They were uncomfortable. Good. After a long moment, I said the only word I needed to say. No. No explanations. No bargaining. No reopening wounds they had never tried to heal. My mother's face crumpled, part confusion, part offense, as if she couldn't quite believe that the reliable scaffolding she had leaned on for so long had simply stepped away. I closed the door, quietly, not slamming it, not making a scene, just closing it and locking it. On the other side, I heard their muffled voices rising, first pleading, then frustrated, but I didn't listen. I walked back to my desk, sat down, and wrapped my hands around my now cold tea, letting the silence settle over me like a bomb. Across the room, the framed letter from Celeste sat beside my computer, the ink still smudged slightly at the corners where she had pressed too hard while writing. I looked at it, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the weight of expectations pressing down on my chest. I thought about all the years I had spent trying to earn my place in a family that only ever measured me by the ways I failed to reflect the image they cherished of themselves. I thought about every time I had swallowed my own pain to make them comfortable, every time I had built a bridge out of my own brokenness, just so they wouldn't have to feel the cold water below. And I thought about the truth, the one I had finally stopped running from. I wasn't created to be convenient. I wasn't born to be a mirror for their pride or a sponge for their disappointments. I was something else entirely, and maybe, just maybe, that was finally enough. They didn't leave right away. I heard the soft scuff of shoes against the doormat, the low murmur of hurried conversation, the desperate edge creeping into their voices. My mother knocked again, lighter this time, almost apologetic. "Natalie, please, we just want to talk." But I stayed where I was, seated at my desk, the framed letter from Celeste a quiet anchor in the growing storm. I took a sip of my cold tea, savoring the bitter taste. I let the knocking continue until it faded into silence. For the first time, I understood that forgiveness didn't always mean reopening the door. Sometimes it meant choosing not to. Sometimes it meant standing still while the people who had hurt you wore themselves out against the wall you finally built. A wall not of anger, but of self-respect. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Eventually, I heard the shuffle of footsteps retreating, the soft thud of car doors closing, the low growl of the engine starting. They were gone. Not defeated, but denied. I rose slowly, walking to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see the back of their car disappearing down the snow-dusted street. No part of me longed to run after them. No part of me ached to call them back. Instead, I felt a deep, resonant peace settle into my bones, the kind of peace that only comes when you finally stop begging for a seat at a table that was never built for you. I turned from the window, moving through my small, quiet apartment with a steadiness I hadn't known I possessed. The Christmas tree still sat in the corner, unlit but no longer sad. The unopened gifts stacked neatly, not as symbols of rejection, but as evidence that I had tried, that I had loved in the best ways I knew how, that I had not failed, they simply hadn't recognized what they had been given. I made myself another cup of tea, stronger this time, the steam rising in lazy spirals. I wrapped the blanket tighter around my shoulders and sat back down at my desk. The letter from Celeste caught the edge of the light, the handwriting steady and sure. "You made a difference," she had written. "You didn't give up. You made her feel like she mattered." I ran my fingers lightly over the frame, feeling the slight ridges of the wood, the coolness of the glass, tangible reminders that even when the people closest to you refuse to see your worth, someone else will. Someone honest. Someone paying attention. I thought about all the years I had spent bending myself into smaller and smaller shapes, trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for me. I thought about the exhaustion, the endless hustle for affection, the way I had mistaken tolerance for love. And I thought about the moment I had closed that door, not with rage, not with bitterness, but with finality. It wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. They hadn't come because they loved me. They had come because they needed me, needed the quiet, compliant version of me to patch over the cracks they refused to acknowledge. But that girl was gone. In her place was a woman who understood that no matter how much you love someone, it's not your job to make them whole. It's not your duty to sacrifice yourself on the altar of their comfort. It's not your destiny to stay broken so they can feel complete. I sat there as the snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the world in clean, unbroken white, and I realized, maybe for the first time, I was free. Days passed, slow and strangely soft, like the first deep breaths after a long-held tension finally breaks. I went back to work. I made rounds at the hospital. I sat with patients whose families still came, and with those whose families had long stopped visiting. I listened. I stayed. I did the work that mattered, the work no one ever threw a party for. One afternoon, a small package arrived at my door, no return address, just my name written in careful, slanted handwriting. I opened it cautiously, peeling back the brown paper to reveal a letter tucked inside thick, ivory-colored stationery. The ink was smudged slightly at the corners, a human touch in a world that often felt too polished. It was from Celeste. She wrote about her grandmother, about how she still practiced yoga twice a week, still walked to the farmer's market every Saturday morning. She wrote about how years ago, when the world had quietly started giving up on an old woman with failing kidneys and a fading spirit, there had been one doctor who didn't, who sat by her bedside long after visiting hours ended, who treated her not as a burden, but as a person still capable of joy, still deserving of dignity. You didn't just save her life, Celeste wrote. You reminded her that she was still living. I read the letter twice, then a third time, tracing the words with my fingertips as if trying to etch them into my skin. I framed it that night, hanging it above my desk where the morning light would catch it, a small, quiet testament to the truth I had almost forgotten. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't heavy. I wasn't too much. I was exactly who I was supposed to be, and the people who couldn't see that were never the measure of my worth. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I didn't feel the itch to explain myself, to justify my boundaries, to apologize for the shape of my existence. I didn't owe anyone an entry ticket into my life, not even those who had once been given the first and best seats. Weeks later, another email arrived, this one less polished, more desperate, more telling. It was a final attempt, one last reach from the family that had spent years asking me to shrink, to smooth, to silence myself for their comfort. It began with the usual phrases, "We miss you. We never meant to hurt you. Can we start over?" And buried near the end, like a splinter they couldn't hide, was the real plea. Please ask Celeste to take down her post. Ethan's struggling to find work now. It's affecting his future. Not an apology, not a reckoning, just another transaction, another debt they believed I should pay. I didn't respond. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. Some doors, once closed, are better left that way, not out of anger, but out of respect for the person you fought so hard to become. As I sat at my desk that evening, filing patient notes, the sun dipped low outside my window, casting long golden streaks across the letter from Celeste. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and for the first time in years felt whole. Not because someone else finally told me I mattered, but because I had stopped asking for permission to believe it myself. So to anyone out there who's ever been made to feel invisible by the people who were supposed to see you first, to anyone who's been called too much, too serious, too inconvenient, let me tell you something they will never say. You're not too much. You are not a burden. And you never needed to shrink yourself to fit into someone else's broken story. Write your own. And if this story touched something inside you, if you've ever sat in the quiet after being left out and realized you were freer than you had ever been, then know this. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not show up at all.